In the beginning, humans were just a young species among countless others in the galaxy, still learning how to travel among the stars, still figuring out how to survive in space, and still trying to understand the incredible mysteries of the universe. Unlike many older civilizations, humans had not been traveling between star systems for thousands or millions of years. They had not built empires that spanned hundreds of light years, nor had they mastered the complex social and military systems that older species had perfected. Yet, despite being relatively new to the galactic stage, humans had something unusual about them, something that made them noticeable even from afar. They had courage, curiosity, and an almost reckless confidence that set them apart. Where other species were careful, calculating, and cautious, humans were bold and direct. Where other species hesitated or plotted endlessly before making a move, humans simply acted. They explored, they discovered, they spoke freely, and they looked at the galaxy as though it were a place made for them to walk through without fear. From the very start, humans were not like other species that the galaxy had encountered. Most civilizations were careful to follow the rules, traditions, and hierarchies established by ancient empires. They respected fear, and they used it as a tool to survive. Many species lived their lives trying to avoid upsetting the dominant powers in the galaxy, because defiance often meant destruction. But humans were different. Even on their own planet, Earth, they had shown the ability to overcome great challenges, to adapt, and to survive despite impossible odds. They had risen from a primitive species to masters of technology, space travel, and science in a relatively short period of time. This rapid growth had given them a sense of self-confidence, a belief that they could face challenges head-on without trembling or retreating. It was this confidence that would later make them truly remarkable when they encountered civilizations far older, far larger, and far more powerful than themselves. The most significant and powerful of these civilizations was the Valdari Galactic Empire. The empire was ancient, with a history stretching back thousands of years. Its rulers had mastered diplomacy, conquest, and war, and they had established an order across countless star systems. They were meticulous, organized, and feared by nearly every other species. Their fleets were vast, their armies disciplined, and their governance strict. The Valdari Empire had dealt with hundreds of species, and nearly all of them had responded in predictable ways, either by bending to the empire's will or by retreating in fear. To the Valdari, power was something respected, and fear was an essential tool to maintain order. They had never encountered a species that could meet them without flinching. Most species approached the empire carefully, often sending representatives who were polite, cautious, and fully aware of their place in the galaxy's hierarchy. The Valdari had learned to expect submission, to expect fear, and to exploit it. They had never expected humans. When humans first entered the outskirts of Valdari space, they appeared ordinary at first glance. Their ships were smaller and less advanced compared to the Empire's massive fleets, and their technology seemed basic by comparison. But what they lacked in size and sophistication, they made up for in boldness and adaptability. Humans didn't send formal ambassadors or perform complex rituals to show respect. Instead, they simply showed up, walked into Valdari space, and began observing, interacting, and asking questions. They treated the Empire's stations, fleets, and personnel with casual curiosity, not fear. They laughed, they joked, they explored, and they acted as if they belonged, even when they clearly didn't. This behavior was completely foreign to the Valdari, who were used to species that either trembled under their gaze or plotted behind the scenes to gain favor. Humans were neither intimidated nor secretive. They were direct, open, and utterly unafraid. The rumors of humans spread quickly through the Empire. Officers whispered to one another about this strange new species that seemed completely immune to fear, completely unconcerned with protocol, and completely unbothered by the displays of power around them. Where other species would bow, kneel, or offer lavish gifts, humans smiled, shook hands, or simply observed. Where others would carefully phrase every word to avoid offending the Empire, humans spoke frankly and honestly, often in ways that shocked or confused their alien counterparts. Their audacity was unlike anything the Empire had ever experienced. The Valdari began to realize that humans could not be read or controlled in the same way as other species. They could not be intimidated with threats or dazzled with displays of wealth and power. Humans simply operated according to their own rules, and the Empire had no framework for understanding them. Part of what made humans so unique was their adaptability. In every interaction, they were able to quickly assess situations, understand alien cultures, and find ways to navigate them without losing their composure. They were curious, asking questions about technology, governance, and history, yet they never crossed lines with aggression or disrespect. Even when they made mistakes, they approached problems logically and persistently, never giving up, never panicking. Other species, when faced with unfamiliar customs or unexpected situations, would freeze, retreat, or react with fear. Humans reacted differently. They analyzed, experimented, and pushed forward. They had learned from their own history on Earth that survival often depended on staying calm, thinking clearly, and taking decisive action. This mindset made them astonishing to the Valdari, who had never encountered such a fearless approach to diplomacy and exploration. Humans also possessed a sense of humor, which seemed strange to the Valdari. Where the Empire was formal and rigid, humans laughed, joked, and sometimes made light of serious situations. This behavior disarmed others, even in tense situations, and allowed humans to diffuse potential conflicts without aggression. The Valdari had never seen humor used as a tool of diplomacy. Most species viewed humor as frivolous or inappropriate in the presence of authority. Humans, however, seemed to use it naturally, without thinking, and it created a strange combination of respect and confusion. The Empire realized that this light-hearted approach, combined with their calm demeanor, made humans nearly impossible to intimidate or manipulate. Another remarkable aspect of humans was their resilience. They had survived on a planet with extreme climates, natural disasters, and dangerous species, and they had adapted to life in the vacuum of space. Their bodies, their minds, and their societies had been shaped by challenges that other species might never face. This resilience was evident in their interactions with the Valdari. When confronted with complex rules, alien technology, or bureaucratic obstacles, humans did not complain, panic, or retreat. Instead, they studied, learned, and adapted. Even when faced with situations that could have been overwhelming or dangerous, they approached them calmly and methodically. To the Valdari, this level of composure seemed almost unnatural. Other species might have been destroyed by the stress of entering the Empire, but humans thrived. The introduction of humans into the Valdari Galactic Empire was not just an encounter, it was a disruption. Their presence challenged the assumptions and traditions that the Empire had built over millennia. Leaders, officers, and scholars began debating what humans were, why they acted so boldly, and how they should be handled. Some feared that humans were dangerous, cunning, or even hostile. Others believed they were simply naive explorers who could be easily managed. Yet, as they observed humans, it became increasingly clear that this species did not operate under the same rules as everyone else. Fear, intimidation, and protocol had no effect. Humans had a unique combination of confidence, curiosity, resilience, and humor that made them unpredictable and utterly fascinating. By the time humans had fully entered the Empire's borders, they were already becoming a legend. Stories spread among the fleets, stations, and planets of the Empire about the species that walked into the heart of galactic power without fear, without hesitation, and without a single sign of intimidation. To the Valdari, it was both unsettling and intriguing. Here was a species that refused to be constrained by tradition, that refused to be ruled by fear, and that seemed perfectly capable of surviving and thriving in an environment where almost every other species would fail. Humans, in their ordinary, everyday way, were extraordinary. They represented a new kind of intelligence, a new kind of courage, and a new approach to life in the galaxy. As humans continued their exploration, the Empire began to realize that their initial assumptions had been wrong. Humans were not weak, naive, or insignificant. They were capable, adaptable, and brave. And they had a way of turning even the most intimidating situations into opportunities for learning and growth. The Empire had never faced a species like this before, and they were beginning to understand that humans would not conform to expectations. They could not be controlled, nor could they be easily predicted. Humans were an enigma, a species that demanded attention and respect simply by existing and remaining unafraid. It was clear that their presence in the Valdari Galactic Empire would not be a brief curiosity. It would change the way the Empire thought about power, diplomacy, and fear. Even at this early stage, humans were planting the seeds of a reputation that would grow over time. They were explorers, traders, and diplomats. But more than that, they were fearless participants in a galaxy dominated by empires, hierarchies, and centuries-old traditions. Their boldness, curiosity, humor, and resilience made them a species unlike any other. While they appeared ordinary on the surface, the Valdari began to sense that humans carried within them the potential to challenge, disrupt, and even transform the established order. In the vast reaches of the galaxy, among civilizations that had ruled for millennia, humans were already making a mark simply by walking in and refusing to be intimidated. Humans were young, new, and underestimated, but they carried an unshakable courage and curiosity that made them remarkable. The Valdari Galactic Empire, with all its power and history, was about to encounter a species that would challenge every expectation, defy every assumption, and demonstrate that fear is not a universal language. Humans walked into the galaxy with open eyes, open minds, and steady hearts, and in doing so, they were about to show that being unafraid, being curious, and being resilient could make them a force to be reckoned with, even among the most powerful civilizations in existence. When humans first approached the edges of the Valdari Galactic Empire, they did not come with grand displays of power or weapons of mass destruction. Their approach was simple, practical, and almost casual. Unlike most species that had encountered the Empire before, Humans did not send massive fleets to show their strength or fleets of diplomats to beg for permission. Instead, they sent small groups of explorers and scientists, equipped with the tools needed for observation, communication, and adaptation. Their ships were modest compared to the enormous warships and patrol fleets of the Vuldari, but they were agile, efficient, and well-designed for long-distance travel. Humans moved through space with the same quiet confidence they had displayed for generations on Earth. They had faced challenges, survived disasters, and adapted to harsh conditions. Now, they were ready to face a galaxy that had never seen a species quite like them. From the beginning, humans were observers, not aggressors. They studied the Empire from a distance at first, watching the patterns of its fleets, the routines of its stations, and the behavior of its officials. They did not act out of fear or caution. They acted out of curiosity. Humans had always been explorers, and the unknown was something to be understood, not feared. When they first approached a Vuldari patrol ship, they hailed it using the universal communication frequencies, speaking clearly and directly, without hiding behind formalities or complex protocols. To the Vuldari, this was astonishing. Other species approached with careful respect, offering formal bows, ceremonial greetings, or elaborate introductions. Humans simply introduced themselves as fellow travelers, explained their purpose, and asked to learn. There was no hidden agenda, no show of subservience, no attempt to manipulate or deceive. They were humans, and their openness was both baffling and intriguing to the Vuldari. The first interactions were small but significant. When humans docked at the outer stations of the Empire, they walked among the Vuldari with the same ease one might walk through a crowded marketplace. They asked questions about the Empire's history, politics, and technology, and they listened carefully to the answers. Sometimes their questions were blunt, sometimes humorous, and sometimes completely unexpected. The Vuldari were used to species that either flattered them or avoided speaking out of fear. But humans spoke openly, respectfully, and confidently. They laughed at minor misunderstandings, joked about differences in culture, and even pointed out inefficiencies they noticed in the station's operations. To a species used to absolute hierarchy and control, this behavior was shocking. Yet, there was no malice in it. Humans were not trying to offend. They were simply being themselves, curious, confident, and willing to engage honestly. What made humans even more remarkable during this early period was their ability to adapt quickly. They encountered alien customs, languages, and technologies that were completely foreign to them. Yet they approached each challenge logically and patiently. When faced with complex communication systems or alien rituals, they observed carefully, asked questions, and tested their understanding through trial and error. They made mistakes, of course, but they corrected them calmly and efficiently, never showing frustration or fear. The Vuldari, who had spent centuries mastering their own protocols and expecting obedience from other species, were amazed. Humans did not panic, they did not flee, and they did not argue unnecessarily. They simply learned, adapted, and continued. This calm, methodical approach made humans appear fearless, competent, and almost unshakable. The reactions of other species were also notable. Many neighboring civilizations had long known the Vuldari Empire as an unstoppable force. Most had learned to navigate carefully, obey the rules, and show deference in every interaction. When humans entered Vuldari space with such boldness, other species watched with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and awe. They whispered about humans behind their hands, trying to figure out whether this was bravery, ignorance, or recklessness. Some feared that humans would be destroyed quickly, while others speculated that humans might somehow survive by doing the unexpected. Either way, the arrival of humans created ripples throughout the galaxy. For the first time in generations, other species witnessed a new variable in galactic affairs, an unpredictable, confident species that did not react to fear in the way everyone else did. During this early period, humans also displayed a remarkable sense of diplomacy, even without following traditional diplomatic rules. They did not bow, they did not flatter, and they did not attempt to manipulate the Vuldari with promises or threats. Instead, they spoke honestly, listened carefully, and approached every interaction with a focus on mutual understanding. They asked practical questions about trade, resources, and exploration, and they offered assistance or cooperation when possible. This behavior was unlike anything the Vuldari had encountered. Other species often tried to impress the Empire with grandiose plans or elaborate schemes, but humans relied on logic, honesty, and adaptability. Even when they faced bureaucratic obstacles or restrictive protocols, they navigated them with patience and calm reasoning. They did not argue aggressively, nor did they submit blindly. They simply found ways to engage effectively while staying true to themselves. Another striking aspect of humans in this early phase was their natural curiosity about technology. The Vuldari Empire had access to machines, ships, and devices far more advanced than anything humans had ever seen. Yet humans approached these technologies not with fear or awe, but with interest and careful study. They asked questions about how systems worked, observed operations closely, and experimented with tools when permitted. Often their questions led to valuable insights for the Vuldari themselves. Humans had a talent for seeing problems differently, finding creative solutions, and applying logic to complex systems. Their ability to interact with alien technology without panic or hesitation made them both useful and unpredictable. The Valdari began to realize that these humans were not just visitors. They were a species capable of understanding and navigating even the most sophisticated systems in ways that many older civilizations could not. Humans were also remarkable in how they handled social interactions. They were friendly, respectful, and communicative, but they were also direct. They did not waste time with unnecessary formalities, and they spoke plainly. This clarity and honesty initially confused many Valdari officials, who were used to layers of etiquette, hierarchy, and coded language. Humans, however, seemed perfectly comfortable speaking plainly, asking direct questions, and expecting straightforward answers. This approach allowed them to build relationships quickly, understand situations clearly, and gain the trust of some Valdari officers. Even those who were initially skeptical could not deny that humans had a unique way of navigating complex social hierarchies without causing offense or losing credibility. The human's sense of humor also played a subtle but important role. While most species took interactions with the Empire very seriously, humans often found light moments, joked about misunderstandings, and laughed at the absurdity of certain protocols. This did not mean they were disrespectful. Rather, their humor made tense situations easier to navigate and created bonds of understanding with those they interacted with. The Valdari, who were accustomed to fear and rigid obedience, found this difficult to comprehend. Humor was not a tool they had considered in diplomacy or exploration, yet humans used it naturally, without thinking, to disarm tension and foster curiosity. This ability to maintain composure, even in unfamiliar or intimidating situations, further reinforced the perception that humans were unflappable and remarkable. Humans also demonstrated remarkable patience and persistence. The bureaucracy of the Valdari Empire was complex, slow, and often frustrating to outsiders. Many species became discouraged or frustrated when navigating permits, trade agreements, or diplomatic protocols. Humans, however, approached each obstacle with calm determination. They analyzed the rules, asked questions, and worked systematically to achieve their goals. Even when progress was slow or officials were uncooperative, humans persisted without anger, panic, or defeat. This persistence, combined with their curiosity and adaptability, made them highly effective at navigating an empire that had been designed to control, intimidate, and overwhelm outsiders. To the Valdari, it was a revelation that a species could remain so composed and effective in an environment where others struggled to survive even minor interactions. Humans had established themselves as a unique presence in the Valdari Empire. They had walked among the Empire's fleets, stations, and officials with casual confidence, observed alien technologies and customs, asked bold questions, and navigated bureaucratic challenges with patience and logic. They had displayed courage, curiosity, humor, and persistence in ways that few species could match. The Valdari began to see humans not as ordinary visitors or naive explorers, but as a species capable of surprising adaptability and unshakable composure. Humans had arrived quietly, without fanfare, but their presence was already beginning to challenge assumptions, create intrigue, and force the Empire to reconsider its expectations of newcomers. Even as humans continued to explore, trade, and learn, the other species watching them could not help but take notice. Stories of humans walking calmly into a vast, powerful empire, asking bold questions, laughing at minor misunderstandings, and adapting quickly spread across nearby star systems. Some species were fearful, wondering if humans would be destroyed for their audacity. Others were amazed, hoping to learn from them or even ally with them. In every case, humans had introduced a new variable into the galactic equation. A species that acted according to its own rules, remained calm in the face of intimidation, and approached the galaxy with curiosity, resilience, and confidence. It was clear that their presence would not be fleeting, and that their interactions with the Valdari Empire would have consequences far beyond the early encounters. Humans had laid the groundwork for the reputation that would follow them throughout the galaxy. They were explorers, yes, but they were explorers with courage, intelligence, and adaptability. They were observers, yes, but observers who asked questions, interacted directly, and learned quickly. They were negotiators, yes, but negotiators who did not rely on fear, threats, or manipulation. In every sense, they were different from any species the Valdari had encountered before. The Empire had expected fear, submission, and cautious diplomacy. Instead, they found calm, curiosity, humor, and persistence. Humans had arrived in the galaxy not to be ruled or intimidated, but to exist, to explore, and to understand. And in doing so, they had already begun to earn respect, even from those who were reluctant to give it. The humans' early situation within the Empire had already set the stage for the larger story to come. They were no longer mere outsiders. They were participants in galactic affairs, observers of the Empire, and catalysts for change. Their presence would challenge assumptions, force new approaches, and create intrigue throughout the Valdari leadership and beyond. Humans had walked calmly into a galaxy that had long been dominated by fear, hierarchy, and tradition, and they had already begun to show that their unique combination of courage, curiosity, and resilience would allow them not only to survive, but to thrive. In this early stage, the seeds were planted for the adventures, conflicts, and transformations that would follow a story of humans who would walk boldly into the unknown, unafraid and unshaken, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in the heart of the Galactic Empire. As humans moved further into the heart of the Valdari Galactic Empire, their presence began to stir unease among the Empire's leaders and citizens alike. Initially, the humans' boldness and casual demeanor had seemed amusing, almost harmless. They were explorers, scientists and traders wandering where no one had dared to move freely without fear. The Valdari, who had built their empire on control, intimidation, and strict hierarchy, had assumed that humans were merely naive, untested wanderers. But as the humans continued their activities, interacting openly with Valdari officers, asking blunt questions, and navigating the Empire's complex bureaucracy with ease, the perception began to shift. Their calm confidence, so unusual for newcomers, started to unsettle even the most composed officials. The early signs of tension began in minor ways. Valdari officers who had once dismissed the humans as insignificant began to notice that these visitors had a strange effect on everyone around them. Lower-ranking Valdari who were accustomed to following orders without question found themselves smiling, laughing, or even questioning their own assumptions when humans were present. The humans did not demand respect, nor did they challenge authority directly, yet they somehow caused the people around them to reconsider their actions, to see situations differently, and to act more openly. For a society built on strict obedience and rigid expectations, this was unusual, unsettling, and even dangerous. Officials whispered in corridors about the humans' strange power, a power not rooted in weapons or fleets, but in presence, confidence, and composure. Humans themselves were unaware of the tension they were creating. To them, the galaxy was a place full of curiosity, discovery, and opportunity. They approached every encounter with honesty, respect, and practicality. When they visited a Valdari station, they asked straightforward questions about governance, trade routes, and technology. When they encountered new species allied with the Empire, they spoke freely, listened intently, and adapted quickly to customs without fear or hesitation. In every interaction, they treated others as equals, neither submitting nor asserting dominance unnecessarily. To the Valdari, however, this was completely unprecedented. They had never encountered a species that refused to bow, that refused to fear, and that refused to be manipulated by power. Humans were challenging centuries of tradition simply by existing as they did. The rising conflict became more pronounced as humans began to inadvertently challenge the Valdari's authority. In one example, humans entered a heavily regulated research facility where only senior Valdari officers were usually permitted. Instead of bowing, offering formal greetings, or waiting for permission, the humans walked confidently, asking questions and observing the operations. To the Valdari, this was a blatant violation of protocol. Officers rushed to intervene, expecting defiance or aggression, but the humans simply smiled and explained that they were explorers seeking knowledge and understanding. They were polite, respectful, and even helpful in some situations, offering ideas that improved efficiency or clarified confusing procedures. The Valdari officers were torn between anger, confusion, and reluctant admiration. The humans had not intended to challenge anyone. They had simply acted as humans naturally would, but the effect was undeniable. The Empire's strict control was being tested, and no one knew exactly how to respond as humans continued their activities. The Valdari leadership debated how to handle the situation. Some argued that humans were naive and must be taught their place. Others warned that any attempt at intimidation or force could backfire. The humans were unlike any species the Empire had encountered. They were not cowed by displays of power, nor were they easily deceived. Threats, bureaucratic obstacles, and even subtle attempts at coercion were met with calm reasoning, curiosity, or humor. But humans were not reckless in a foolish way. They were bold, observant, and resilient. They had learned through their own history that courage, intelligence, and adaptability often mattered more than raw strength, and they approached the Empire's challenges with this mindset. For the Valdari, this presented a dilemma. How could an empire accustomed to fear-based obedience respond to a species immune to intimidation? The conflict began to take on a larger dimension when other species in the galaxy started noticing humans. Interactions with the aliens who had long lived under the Empire's shadow were astonished to see humans asking direct questions, offering advice, and navigating complex social hierarchies without fear. Some were inspired, seeing humans as a new model for confidence and independence. Others were fearful, worried that the humans' presence could provoke retaliation or destabilize the carefully maintained order. Within the Empire, whispers turned into discussions, and discussions turned into debates. That humans were not actively causing chaos, but their mere presence and behavior were enough to make others rethink assumptions about power, obedience, and the natural order. They had introduced a new variable that could not be ignored. One of the most significant sources of rising conflict was the humans' refusal to follow ceremonial protocols that were sacred to the Valdari. These rituals, which involved formal greetings, intricate gestures, and strict hierarchies, were designed to demonstrate submission, respect, and fear. Every other species in the galaxy understood the importance of these protocols. Humans, however, approached them differently. They did not mock the ceremonies, but they also did not feel the need to perform them in the expected way. They adapted politely, offered thoughtful questions, and sometimes made light-hearted observations. To the Valdari, this was shocking. Other species would have collapsed under the weight of expectation or performed the rituals flawlessly out of fear. Humans performed them in their own way, calmly and confidently, without offense or hesitation. This refusal to conform, even politely, was a direct challenge to the Empire's long-held traditions. The Valdari Empire's military leadership also felt tension as humans moved further into Imperial space. Fleet commanders were instructed to monitor, escort, and occasionally intimidate the humans, but these measures had little effect. Humans navigated complex space lanes, observed fleet operations, and interacted with officers calmly and methodically. When confronted with displays of firepower or attempts at intimidation, humans did not panic or retreat. Instead, they analyzed the situation logically, considered all available options, and responded with appropriate caution but never with fear. Their calmness in the face of overwhelming power was both frustrating and awe-inspiring to the Valdari. Officers began to question long-held assumptions about discipline, obedience, and the effectiveness of fear. Humans were forcing the Empire to rethink its strategies, simply by acting naturally. The rising conflict was not limited to formal interactions. Humans also began to influence the social dynamics within the Empire. Lower-ranking officers and personnel were drawn to the humans' confidence, curiosity, and humor. They asked questions, observed, and even learned from them. Humans did not intentionally seek to challenge authority, but their very presence encouraged others to think independently. This subtle shift worried the Valdari leadership, who understood that influence over individuals could eventually affect the Empire as a whole. Humans were not just visitors, they were catalysts for change, and the Empire had no clear way to control or contain them. The tension between humans and the Valdari grew steadily, not through violence or aggression, but through curiosity, adaptability, and quiet confidence. The humans' rising impact was further amplified by their ability to solve practical problems whenever they encountered inefficiencies, miscommunications, or technical difficulties. They analyzed the situation calmly and suggested solutions. Often, their ideas were simple yet effective, improving operations or clarifying complex procedures. Other species might have been intimidated or confused by the same challenges, but humans approached them with a combination of logic, observation, and creativity. To the Valdari, this was both astonishing and troubling. A species that was not bound by fear or hierarchy could challenge the Empire's systems without malice, and the implications were significant. Humans were demonstrating that effectiveness, confidence, and adaptability could rival authority and power, even in the heart of a vast galactic empire. Another element contributing to rising conflict was the humans' resilience. They faced situations that could have overwhelmed other species, including bureaucratic red tape, cultural misunderstandings, and even subtle threats. Yet they remained calm and composed. They learned quickly, adapted efficiently, and persisted despite obstacles. Their resilience was not just physical, it was mental, social, and emotional. They did not let intimidation, confusion, or pressure dictate their behavior. This resilience made humans unpredictable and difficult to control. The Valdari, who were used to bending other species through fear and discipline, were increasingly frustrated. Their usual tactics did not work, and the humans' continued presence was beginning to disrupt established norms. The tension between human confidence and Valdari expectation was steadily increasing, setting the stage for a confrontation that neither side could fully anticipate. In addition to resilience, humans displayed remarkable patience. They never reacted impulsively to confusion or frustration. When faced with barriers, whether administrative, cultural, or technological, they carefully analyzed, experimented, and found ways forward. Unlike many species that would have panicked, retreated, or caused conflict, humans approached problems with calm determination. This patience, combined with their confidence and adaptability, made them appear almost unshakable. To the Valdari, a species that could remain composed in every situation was both fascinating and unnerving. Their ability to endure, adapt, and continue without fear challenged the very foundation of the Empire's assumptions about power, control, and influence. The humans had achieved something remarkable. They had entered a vast, powerful empire and begun to influence it without overt aggression or malice. The Valdari, who had long relied on fear, intimidation, and hierarchy to maintain control, were forced to reconsider their assumptions. Humans were not aggressive conquerors, nor were they naive explorers. They were a species that operated according to their own rules, confident in their abilities and unafraid to exist in the presence of power. The tension between human independence and Valdari expectations continued to build, creating a conflict that was not fought with weapons, but with courage, curiosity, resilience, and quiet defiance. Humans were steadily becoming a force the Empire could neither ignore nor easily control. As the humans' influence grew, other species in the galaxy watched with keen interest. Some admired the humans' confidence and adaptability, seeing in them a new model for how to survive and thrive among powerful civilizations. Others were fearful, concerned that the humans' independence could provoke the Empire or destabilize carefully maintained orders. Within the Valdari Empire, the humans' actions sparked debates among officials, officers, and scholars. How should a civilization that had relied on fear for centuries respond to a species immune to intimidation? The questions multiplied, and the answers remained uncertain. Humans, by simply existing as they did, were creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond their immediate interactions, challenging long-held assumptions and subtly reshaping the dynamics of galactic power. It was clear that the humans' presence in the Valdari Empire had moved beyond curiosity and exploration. They were now central to a rising conflict, one that was not fought with weapons or violence, but with courage, logic, humor, and resilience. The Empire's leaders and citizens alike were forced to confront a reality they had never anticipated. Humans could not be intimidated, controlled, or predicted using traditional methods. The tension had grown, the stakes had increased, and the stage was set for a series of encounters that would test the humans' abilities and the Empire's understanding of power. Diplomacy and fear. Humans had arrived as explorers, but their actions had already sparked a conflict that would challenge the very foundation of the Valdari Galactic Empire. As humans continued to explore deeper into the Valdari Galactic Empire, the subtle tension that had been building for months reached a critical point. The earlier phases where humans' calm confidence, adaptability, and curiosity had unsettled the Empire's leaders were no longer minor curiosities or amusing anomalies. By now, humans had become an undeniable force that the Valdari could neither predict nor control. What had once been mild surprise and fascination had grown into a mix of frustration, fear, and grudging respect. For the first time in centuries, the Empire faced a species that refused to follow the established rules of diplomacy, the hierarchy, and fear, and the result was a breaking point, a moment where both sides realized that something unprecedented was happening. The tension escalated when humans were assigned to negotiate with a high council of Valdari officials over trade agreements and exploration rights in a sensitive sector of the Empire. Other species, when confronted with the council's formidable reputation and intimidating presence, would have approached with extreme caution, following strict protocols, bowing, offering gifts, and speaking in elaborate, formalized language. Humans, however, arrived without any pretense. They walked into the council chambers with steady composure, made eye contact with each official, and addressed the assembly directly. They did not flinch at the display of authority, nor did they attempt to manipulate or appeal to fear. Instead, they introduced themselves politely, stated their intentions clearly, and asked practical, logical questions about trade, resources, and regulations. To the council, this behavior was shocking. It was as though centuries of intimidation, hierarchy, and authority had no effect on the humans whatsoever. The council initially tried subtle intimidation. A few members raised their voices, presented detailed regulations, and emphasized the risks of missteps. Others tried to overwhelm the humans with data, historical precedents, and warnings about consequences for failing to follow protocol. Every tactic the council employed, however, failed. Humans responded with calm reasoning, politely addressing each point, acknowledging the concerns, and offering thoughtful solutions that adhered to the Empire's rules while still maintaining their independence. They did not argue aggressively, they did not beg for approval, and they did not retreat. Instead, they continued their negotiation with patience and clarity. The council members, who had grown accustomed to immediate compliance or fear, were now confronted with a species that would not bend under pressure, a species that thought and acted according to its own rules. The situation became even more intense when one of the council's most senior members attempted to enforce a ceremonial test of obedience. This ritual, performed by nearly every species before they could engage in meaningful negotiation, required participants to bow, recite formal phrases, and display a level of reverence considered essential to the Empire. Failure to perform the ritual correctly could be interpreted as disrespect or even hostility, often leading to punishment or expulsion. Humans, however, approached the ceremony in their own way. They did not mock it, but they did not blindly follow every rule either. They adapted respectfully, performed what they could, and asked questions to understand the purpose behind each action. To the council, this was unthinkable. Every other species had complied without hesitation. Yet humans navigated the test with calm confidence, demonstrating understanding without submission. This defiance, subtle but undeniable, marked a breaking point in the relationship between the humans and the Empire. As the humans continued to navigate the council's expectations, the reactions of the Valdari became increasingly intense. Some officials were outraged, believing that humans were challenging the very foundations of the Empire's authority. Others were terrified, realizing that these visitors were not bound by fear or tradition. The council held emergency meetings to discuss how to deal with the humans, debating whether to punish them, expel them, or attempt to control them through other means. Fleet commanders suggested displays of power, including positioning warships near the humans' locations to intimidate them. Diplomats proposed stricter rules, more oversight, and mandatory adherence to protocol. Scholars analyzed the humans' behavior, trying to determine whether they were cunning, naive, or exceptionally resilient. Every option seemed risky, because the humans' reactions were unpredictable. Unlike other species, humans did not respond to fear, threats, or strict control. They responded with intelligence, curiosity, humor, and calm reasoning. During this breaking point, humans remained entirely unaware of the full magnitude of the tension they were causing. To them, the galaxy was still a place of exploration, understanding, and opportunity. They continued to interact openly with Valdari officers, scientists, and officials, asking questions, learning from the Empire's technologies, and offering practical solutions when possible. Their humor remained present, lightening tense situations, but never causing offense. They approached conflicts not with aggression, but with patience, reasoning, and diplomacy. Every move they made, every calm response they offered in the face of intimidation, further destabilized the Council's expectations. The humans were living examples of a species unafraid to exist in the presence of power, and their composure was slowly transforming the perception of everyone around them. One particularly significant moment came when the humans encountered a fleet inspection led by the Empire's most senior admirals. This inspection was intended to intimidate visitors, demonstrating the Empire's power through a display of hundreds of warships, drills, and military precision. The humans, however, observed quietly, asked questions about strategy and logistics, and made careful notes. They did not flinch, they did not retreat, and they did not attempt to impress. To the admirals who had expected awe, fear, or hesitation, this was incomprehensible. They could not understand how a species could witness such overwhelming power and remain calm, composed, and thoughtful. Their frustration grew, but they were also intrigued. Humans were breaking the rules of engagement not through aggression, but through sheer fearlessness, adaptability, and intelligence. The breaking point was further amplified when humans intervened in a minor administrative dispute that had stumped Valdari officials for months. The dispute involved the allocation of resources between two colonies, and it had become mired in bureaucracy, tradition, and complex regulations. Humans analyzed the situation calmly, asked logical questions, and proposed a solution that was fair, efficient, and aligned with the Empire's existing rules. Their intervention resolved the issue quickly, without creating conflict, but it had a profound effect on the Council and the Empire at large. Here was a species that not only refused to be intimidated but could also solve problems that had confounded the most experienced Valdari officials. The breaking point was no longer theoretical. It had become a tangible moment where humans' presence could no longer be ignored, minimized, or controlled. As the humans' influence grew, so did the reactions of the Valdari population. Officers, administrators, and citizens began to discuss the humans openly, debating their intentions, capabilities, and potential threat. Some feared that the humans' independence would provoke retaliation or destabilize the Empire. Others admired the humans' courage, resilience, and intelligence, secretly hoping to learn from them or emulate their approach. Even within the Empire, the humans had begun to create factions of thought, those who wanted to contain them, those who wanted to study them, and those who had begun to respect them. The breaking point had arrived because the humans had done nothing violent or aggressive. They had simply acted as humans naturally would, and the result was enough to force an entire civilization to confront something new, unexpected, and potentially transformative. Part of the breaking point involved communication as well. Humans did not rely on manipulation, deception, or complex diplomatic tactics. They spoke plainly, honestly, and respectfully. They asked direct questions and expected clear answers. This approach was frustrating to the Valdari, who were accustomed to obfuscation, coded language, and manipulation. Yet, it was also effective. Humans' clarity forced officials to think carefully, explain themselves fully, and confront inconsistencies in their own systems. In many ways, humans were holding up a mirror to the Empire, reflecting its complexities, inefficiencies, and rigid traditions. This reflection was uncomfortable, and it contributed directly to the growing tension. That humans had reached a point where their mere presence and straightforward approach could no longer be ignored, controlled, or dismissed. Humans also demonstrated remarkable emotional composure. In moments of high stress, such as inspections, debates, and negotiations, they remained calm, focused, and polite. They did not allow fear, frustration, or confusion to dictate their behavior. Instead, they responded logically, observed carefully, and continued forward with patience and determination. This composure was unusual not only to the Valdari but also to other species watching from afar. Humans were not reckless, they were deliberate. They were not naive, they were observant. They were not submissive, they were unafraid. This combination of qualities made them unique and created the conditions for a breaking point that was not about violence or aggression, but about the collision of confidence, intelligence, and independence with an empire built on control, fear, and hierarchy. Asterisk, the humans' ability to navigate conflict without aggression also added to the breaking point. When tensions arose, they did not escalate the situation unnecessarily. They listened, considered, and responded thoughtfully. Their humor diffused stress, their logic clarified confusion, and their patience prevented mistakes. Even in situations that could have led to confrontation, they maintained composure, resolved problems efficiently, and respected those around them. This behavior was so unlike anything the Faldari had experienced that it forced a reassessment of strategy, authority, and expectation. The humans were proving that strength and influence did not always come from power, intimidation, or tradition. They could also come from clarity, resilience, and fearlessness. It was clear that the humans had fundamentally changed the dynamics of the Valdari Galactic Empire. They were no longer mere visitors or explorers. They had become a force that demanded attention, respect, and careful consideration. The council, admirals, officers, and citizens all recognized that these humans could not be controlled in the traditional sense. They could not be intimidated, coerced, or easily predicted. The breaking point had arrived because the humans had done nothing extraordinary in terms of technology or weaponry. They had simply been themselves, courageous, curious, resilient, and composed. The Valdari had to acknowledge a reality they had never faced before. Humans were a species unlike any other, and the Empire would need to adapt to their presence rather than attempting to force them to conform. Asterisk, both humans and the Empire understood that the future interactions would be different. Humans would continue to act as they always had, exploring, learning, and engaging with the Empire in their calm, logical, and fearless way. The Valdari, on the other hand, would need to reconsider long-held assumptions about control, obedience, and intimidation. The collision of these two worlds, humans with their independence and resilience, and the Valdari with their centuries-old traditions and power structures, had created a moment of reckoning. This phase of breaking point was not the conclusion of conflict, but the necessary turning point that would lead to resolution. Humans had walked into the heart of the Empire and, without aggression, without fear, had reached a point where the entire galactic hierarchy had to pause, observe, and reconsider. After months of tension, uncertainty, and subtle conflict, the humans' presence in the Valdari Galactic Empire began to move toward resolution. This was not a resolution born of force, dominance, or aggression, but of understanding, mutual recognition, and adaptability. The breaking point had exposed the limits of the Empire's traditional methods. Fear, intimidation, and strict hierarchy could not control a species that refused to respond to threats, a species that approached every challenge with intelligence, curiosity, and calm confidence. The humans' behavior had forced the Valdari to rethink how they interacted with outsiders, how they exercised power, and how they managed their own assumptions. Resolution came gradually, in small steps, through observation, dialogue, and the subtle shift in attitudes among the Empire's leaders, officers, and citizens. One of the earliest signs of resolution was the recognition that humans were neither reckless nor malicious. At first, the Valdari had feared that these outsiders might attempt to undermine the Empire, steal technology, or provoke chaos. Every action, from their casual approach to high-ranking councils to their questions about resource distribution and technology, had been scrutinized for hidden motives. Over time, however, it became clear that humans acted consistently with honesty and logic. They were straightforward, transparent, and engaged openly. They did not manipulate, deceive, or attempt to exploit weaknesses. Even when they challenged established norms, they did so respectfully, often providing thoughtful reasoning behind their questions or actions. This consistency reassured the Valdari that humans were reliable in their own way, even if their methods were unfamiliar. Another key factor in reaching resolution was humans' ability to demonstrate value without seeking to dominate. In numerous instances, humans offered practical solutions to logistical, administrative, and technical problems within the Empire. They improved efficiency in trade routes, clarified bureaucratic procedures, and offered creative solutions to long-standing disputes between colonies. These contributions were not motivated by the desire for recognition or reward, but by practical reasoning and a desire to understand the universe. Their interventions were effective, fair, and considerate, earning admiration even from officials who had initially viewed them with suspicion. Through these actions, humans proved that collaboration was possible without fear, that influence could come from intelligence and creativity rather than coercion, and that respect could be earned through competence and integrity. Communication played a central role in the resolution process. Humans did not rely on indirect messages, deception, or intimidation. They communicated directly, calmly, and politely. They asked questions to clarify, explained their perspectives clearly, and listened attentively to responses. When misunderstandings occurred, which they inevitably did due to cultural differences, they addressed them promptly, without anger or defensiveness. This approach gradually built trust between humans and the Valdari, as well as between humans and other species allied with the Empire. By simply communicating with transparency and respect, humans were able to reduce friction, establish mutual understanding, and create space for cooperation. The Empire realized that a species that spoke honestly and consistently could be integrated into their systems without fear of disruption or rebellion. Humans also demonstrated remarkable patience during this period. The Valdari Empire was vast, with intricate rules, complex hierarchies, and centuries-old traditions. Navigating this bureaucracy could be daunting, even for native species accustomed to the Empire's procedures. Humans, however, approached each challenge with calm determination. They analyzed problems, observed existing protocols, and experimented thoughtfully to find solutions. They did not complain about delays or obstacles, nor did they allow frustration to dictate their actions. Their patience and persistence were crucial in achieving resolution because it allowed them to work effectively within the Empire's systems without triggering conflict. By consistently demonstrating reliability and composure, humans slowly earned the confidence of the Valdari, showing that they could operate safely and productively in imperial space. Humor and social adaptability were also vital in smoothing tensions. While the Valdari had initially been confused or irritated by the humans' light-hearted approach to interactions, over time this trait became a bridge between cultures. Humans used humor to diffuse potentially tense situations, to acknowledge mistakes without blame, and to make new alliances more approachable. Their humor was never disrespectful, it was inclusive, clever, and situationally appropriate. Through these interactions, humans fostered goodwill and encouraged others to see them as approachable, competent, and trustworthy. Humor, combined with consistency, intelligence, and respect, contributed significantly to the gradual resolution of tension between humans and the Empire. During this period, humans also demonstrated a remarkable ability to learn from the Valdari while remaining independent. They observed the Empire's protocols, ceremonies, and traditions carefully, asking questions when needed to understand the reasons behind rules and practices. They adapted without compromising their principles, performing rituals with respect while maintaining their own identity. This balance of understanding the Empire's systems while retaining personal and cultural integrity was crucial in building mutual recognition. That Valdari realized that humans could respect authority without being subjugated, could follow rules without losing independence, and could contribute meaningfully without attempting to dominate. This understanding marked a significant step toward resolution. As the Empire began to accept humans as a unique species capable of coexistence within their system, the humans' effectiveness in conflict resolution further accelerated the process. In one notable example, a long-standing dispute arose between two imperial colonies over resource allocation and trade priorities. The conflict had persisted for years due to bureaucratic delays and competing political interests. Humans, analyzing the situation, proposed a solution that was equitable, efficient, and aligned with the Empire's regulations. Their intervention resolved the dispute quickly and fairly, without upsetting the balance of power or causing resentment. The Valdari officers involved in the negotiation were initially skeptical, but they soon recognized the value of humans' input. This event reinforced the notion that humans were not threats, they were problem solvers capable of enhancing the Empire's operations while maintaining harmony. Their ability to mediate, reason, and act with integrity became a cornerstone of the emerging resolution. Another critical aspect of resolution was the humans' demonstration of adaptability under pressure. The Empire presented challenges that tested the humans' limits: complex trade regulations, unfamiliar political hierarchies, advanced technology, and situations where social missteps could have severe consequences. In each case, humans responded logically, observed carefully, and adapted swiftly. They learned from errors without panic, corrected misunderstandings without anger, and engaged with others respectfully and effectively. This adaptability reassured the Valdari that humans could thrive within the Empire without causing instability. It also demonstrated to the humans themselves that they could operate successfully in an environment far more complex and intimidating than anything they had encountered before, strengthening their confidence and competence. The resolution process also involved symbolic moments that signified a growing mutual understanding. In several ceremonial contexts, humans participated in ways that respected Valdari traditions while remaining authentically themselves. They acknowledged the authority of officials, performed rituals to the extent necessary, and expressed gratitude and respect, all without compromising their cultural norms or principles. These gestures were carefully observed by the council and other officials, who interpreted them as signs that humans could coexist with the Empire while maintaining independence. These moments were subtle but significant. They marked the transition from conflict to recognition, from tension to cautious cooperation. Humans had not needed to dominate, intimidate, or conform entirely. They had achieved resolution through composure, intelligence, and mutual respect as humans continued to demonstrate reliability. competence, and ethical behavior, the Valdari leadership began to adjust their expectations. Initially, humans had been considered potential threats, outsiders whose presence had to be strictly monitored and controlled. Over time, however, officials recognized that the humans were consistent, predictable in their honesty, and unlikely to engage in deception or aggression. Their presence, once considered a challenge, began to be integrated into the Empire's operations. Humans were granted more access to research, trade, and exploration opportunities, and they were allowed to interact with officials and colonies more freely. This shift did not happen overnight, but it marked a significant milestone in the resolution process. The Empire had accepted humans as a legitimate, valued presence within its systems. The humans' success in navigating cultural differences also contributed to resolution. The Empire's customs, etiquette, and social norms were intricate, often requiring careful observation and practice to understand fully. Mans approached these differences not with fear, avoidance, or mockery, but with curiosity and respect. They asked questions when necessary, observed closely, and learned from mistakes. Their ability to adapt while maintaining authenticity impressed the Valdari and built trust. Other species noticed this as well, recognizing that humans could engage effectively in cross-cultural interactions without losing identity or respect. In this way, humans set a standard for cooperation, adaptability, and ethical behavior that became a model for future engagement with the Empire. Humans had achieved a remarkable balance. They had maintained their independence and principles while integrating successfully into the Valdar Empire's systems. They had resolved tensions not through aggression, force, or manipulation, but through composure, intelligence, curiosity, patience, and respect. The Valdari, initially perplexed and frustrated by humans' behavior, now regarded them as capable, trustworthy, and admirable. Humans had demonstrated that influence and cooperation could be achieved without fear or submission, and that even the most powerful civilizations could accommodate newcomers who acted with integrity and confidence. The breaking point had passed, and resolution had been reached, not by victory or defeat, but by mutual understanding and recognition of value. Even as resolution was achieved, the humans' presence continued to have long-term effects. They had shown that traditional methods of control, fear, intimidation, hierarchy were not universally effective. They had introduced new ways of thinking about diplomacy, problem-solving, and social interaction. They had demonstrated that courage, intelligence, resilience, and honesty could shift power dynamics subtly but profoundly. The Empire had adapted, slowly and cautiously, recognizing that humans were neither a threat nor a subordinate species, but an independent, capable, and valuable presence in the galaxy. Through careful observation, respectful interaction, and consistent behavior, humans had achieved resolution while remaining authentically themselves, a feat few species could accomplish in the heart of a vast, centuries-old empire. It was clear that the humans had successfully navigated the most difficult stage of their integration into the Valdar Empire. They had moved from outsiders to respected participants, from sources of tension to agents of cooperation, from unpredictable newcomers to reliable allies. The resolution did not come through force, compliance, or aggression, but through patience, curiosity, adaptability, and composure. Humans had proven that even in the face of immense power, rigid traditions, and high stakes, it was possible to achieve understanding and influence while remaining true to one's identity. Their journey through this stage marked a turning point, not only for themselves but for the entire empire, as both humans and Valdari began to imagine new possibilities for collaboration, exploration, and coexistence. After the resolution with the Valdari Galactic Empire, the humans took a step back to observe the changes they had helped bring about. Unlike most species that had encountered the Empire, humans were not driven by conquest, fear, or the desire to dominate. Their purpose had always been exploration, understanding, and coexistence. Now, with the tension resolved and mutual recognition established, they could reflect on the profound effects their presence had created, both within the Empire and among themselves. The aftermath was not quiet or uneventful. It was a period of subtle transformation, learning, and contemplation. As humans and the Valdari alike began to process the consequences of months of interaction, tension, and eventual resolution, the first thing humans noticed was the change in attitude among Valdari officials, officers, and citizens. Initially, humans had been perceived as outsiders, intruders, or even potential threats. Over time, as they remained composed, curious, and respectful, the Empire began to regard them differently. What had once been suspicion and fear had shifted into cautious respect and, in some cases, admiration. Humans had demonstrated qualities that many Valdari had not expected to see in any species: honesty, consistency, adaptability, patience, and resilience. These traits, simple yet profound, had created ripples through the Empire, where once humans had been anomalies to be controlled. They were now examples of a species that could engage meaningfully without seeking to dominate. Valdari officials found themselves re-evaluating assumptions about strength, influence, and leadership. humans, through their actions alone, that had subtly reshaped the Empire's perception of what a species could achieve. Without intimidation or aggression, humans themselves reflected on the journey with a combination of curiosity, humility, and quiet pride. They had walked into an empire that had been established over centuries, a civilization that wielded immense power and demanded absolute obedience. They had not arrived with fear, nor had they sought to provoke conflict. Yet, through their natural behaviors, their calmness, clarity, and respect, they had achieved something remarkable. They had shown that influence and recognition could be earned through integrity, intelligence, and courage, rather than through force. This realization was both empowering and enlightening. Humans began to consider the broader implications of their actions, how their approach could serve as a model for future encounters with other powerful civilizations, and how patience, observation, and consistency could resolve conflicts in ways that aggression never could. One of the most important reflections was the effect on the humans' understanding of interstellar politics. Before entering the Empire, they had studied it from afar, learning about fleets, bureaucracies, hierarchies, and traditions. However, theoretical knowledge could not fully prepare them for the realities of interacting with a civilization that operated on rules completely different from their own. Experiencing the Empire firsthand, humans learned the nuances of diplomacy, the subtle art of negotiation, and the importance of observation in understanding cultural expectations. They recognized that influence did not always require formal authority or advanced technology. Sometimes, it came from simply being composed, intelligent, and consistent in one's interactions. These lessons became part of the humans' collective knowledge, shaping their strategies for future exploration and interaction with other species and civilizations across the galaxy. Another aspect of the aftermath was the effect humans had on the Empire itself. While they had not set out to change the Vuldari, their presence had inevitably prompted reflection and adaptation within the Empire. Officials and officers began to consider the limitations of their traditional methods. Centuries of relying on intimidation, hierarchy, and fear had not worked with humans. The Empire had been forced to acknowledge that not all species could be controlled using the same approach. This realization led to subtle changes in policies, procedures, and attitudes. Some council members began to advocate for more flexibility in dealing with outsiders, suggesting that engagement and cooperation could be as effective as displays of power. Fleet commanders and administrators reconsidered the way they approached negotiations and conflict resolution. Even the Vuldari citizens, particularly those who had interacted directly with humans, began to question assumptions about obedience and hierarchy. In this way, humans had introduced a new paradigm, showing that influence could arise from respect, intelligence, and cooperation rather than dominance. The reflection extended to the social dynamics within the Empire as well. Humans' presence encouraged other species to reconsider their own roles, behaviors, and interactions. Aliens who had long lived under Vuldari rule saw humans approach challenges with confidence, adaptability, and composure. Some were inspired to adopt similar behaviors, asking questions more boldly, approaching problems more logically, and engaging with officials in ways they had previously feared to attempt. Others were cautious, recognizing the potential risk of deviating from established norms. But the very fact that humans had successfully navigated the Empire's systems without conflict provided a powerful example. Humans had demonstrated that it was possible to maintain identity, operate effectively, and earn recognition even in an environment dominated by a powerful hierarchical civilization. Their influence extended beyond immediate interactions, shaping the attitudes, strategies, and expectations of multiple species throughout the galaxy. Humans also reflected on the lessons of cultural understanding. The Vuldari Empire was vast, with customs, etiquette, and traditions that had developed over centuries. To navigate this environment successfully, humans had to observe carefully, ask thoughtful questions, and adapt without compromising their principles. They learned that understanding another culture required patience, empathy, and attention to detail. They discovered that respect did not necessarily mean submission, and that differences in behavior, communication, and expectation could be bridged through clarity, curiosity, and flexibility. These lessons became part of the humans' broader philosophy of interaction with other civilizations. They realized that even in unfamiliar or intimidating environments, cooperation and mutual understanding could be achieved through calm observation, respectful engagement, and consistent behavior. Technology and strategy were also areas of reflection. Humans had interacted with the Empire's advanced technology, ships, communication systems, logistics networks, and more often in ways that were unexpected to the Vuldari. They had approached these systems with curiosity, reasoning, and careful experimentation rather than fear or blind obedience. Their ability to analyze, adapt, and sometimes improve these systems without malicious intent impressed the Vuldari and allowed humans to contribute meaningfully to operational efficiency. This reflection reinforced humans' belief that intelligence, creativity, and adaptability were as important as technological power, and that engagement with alien systems could be effective when approached with patience, respect, and a logical mindset. Humans had learned that technology alone did not define power. The understanding and application of knowledge, combined with careful observation, were equally critical. Another important aspect of reflection involved the recognition of resilience. Humans had faced challenges and misunderstandings, bureaucratic obstacles, and social tensions, yet they had remained composed throughout. They had learned to navigate fear, confusion, and intimidation without losing clarity or focus. This resilience was not just physical or strategic, it was emotional, social, and intellectual. Humans realized that their ability to remain composed under pressure had been crucial in building trust and achieving resolution. They reflected on how patience, calm reasoning, and integrity had allowed them to earn respect, solve problems, and influence outcomes without aggression. This insight became a guiding principle for their future interactions with other civilizations and situations of potential conflict. Humans also considered the long-term consequences of their presence in the Empire. By successfully navigating the Valdaris systems, resolving conflicts, and establishing trust, they had opened doors for continued exploration, trade, and collaboration. Other species and officials within the Empire had begun to recognize humans as reliable partners, capable of contributing meaningfully to interstellar initiatives. Humans' ability to adapt, understand, and cooperate created opportunities not only for themselves but also for the Empire and its allies. They realized that lasting influence and recognition could be achieved through constructive engagement rather than domination or manipulation. This understanding shaped the humans' vision for future missions and interactions, emphasizing collaboration, mutual benefit, and respect as guiding principles. The aftermath also brought reflections on leadership and diplomacy. Humans had engaged with a civilization whose hierarchy and authority structures were deeply entrenched. They had succeeded not by challenging authority overtly, but by demonstrating competence, fairness, and consistency. They had earned recognition through behavior rather than titles, persuasion rather than force. Humans reflected on how these principles could be applied in other contexts. That effective leadership often involves observation, adaptation, and ethical action rather than coercion, and that diplomacy can be achieved through clarity, patience, and empathy. These lessons became part of the humans' broader philosophy, informing future strategies for engagement with both allies and potential adversaries across the galaxy. Humans also reflected on the subtle influence they had had on the Faldari themselves. Their calm, confidence, honesty, and adaptability had challenged long-held assumptions about obedience, control, and hierarchy. Officials and citizens alike had been forced to reconsider the effectiveness of fear and intimidation, and to recognize that cooperation and mutual respect could be equally, if not more, effective in achieving goals. Humans had introduced a new perspective, a model of engagement that emphasized intelligence, resilience, and ethical action. By simply existing and acting according to their principles, humans had reshaped thinking within the Empire, creating an enduring legacy of influence that went beyond immediate interactions. In addition to their impact on the Empire, humans reflected on their own growth. They had faced challenges unlike any on Earth: unfamiliar technologies, complex bureaucracies, alien cultures, and high-stakes situations in a galaxy governed by centuries of tradition. They had learned to navigate these environments with patience, clarity, and composure. They had refined their strategies for observation, communication, problem-solving, and conflict resolution. They had discovered that adaptability, intelligence, and ethical behavior were key to surviving and thriving in environments far more complex than those they had known. This period of reflection reinforced their confidence, broadened their understanding of interstellar society, and prepared them for future encounters, not only with the Valdari, but with countless other civilizations across the galaxy. Humans also reflected on the personal and collective relationships that had developed. Bonds had formed with individuals within the Valdari Empire: officers, administrators, scientists, and citizens who had interacted with humans directly. These relationships were based on mutual respect, trust, and shared problem-solving rather than fear or obligation. Humans recognized the importance of these connections, understanding that relationships were as powerful as technology, fleets, or regulations in shaping the future of interstellar cooperation. They had demonstrated that influence, collaboration, and understanding could thrive when grounded in integrity and openness, and that meaningful connections could persist even in the most complex and hierarchical environments. Finally, humans reflected on the broader philosophical implications of their journey. By walking calmly into one of the galaxy's most powerful empires and interacting with composure, intelligence, and respect, they had demonstrated that even the most intimidating systems could be engaged constructively. They had shown that courage, clarity, patience, and ethical behavior could achieve outcomes as effectively as aggression or coercion. They had created ripples of change within the Empire, influenced the behavior of other species, and gained insight into their own capacities and principles. The aftermath was a time of deep reflection, where humans considered the lessons learned, the relationships formed, and the opportunities that lay ahead. They recognized that their journey was not only about exploration but also about understanding. influence, and the potential to shape the galaxy through presence, integrity, and action. Humans had established a lasting legacy within the Faldari Galactic Empire. Their calm, composed, and ethical approach had transformed tension into understanding, suspicion into respect, and conflict into cooperation. They had proven that influence could be achieved without aggression, that resilience and clarity could overcome intimidation, and that meaningful engagement could thrive through observation, curiosity, and ethical action. The aftermath was not merely a return to normalcy. It was a period of profound learning, reflection, and growth for humans and for the Empire alike. Humans had walked into a powerful civilization and, without fanfare or force, had left an indelible mark, showing that courage, intelligence, and integrity could redefine the rules of interaction in even the most intimidating environments.